Ruthless mountain man said he'd never marry a fat girl. Then she walked in. The saloon doors slam open. Dust swirls in the lantern light. A hard, scarred mountain man spits the words that silence the room. I'd never marry a fat girl. But before the laughter dies, the door creaks again. A widow steps inside alone, grieving, yet standing taller than all of them. The preacher whispers of her claim to a valley the railroad will kill to own. The mountain man smirks until she dares to face the jeers with quiet faith and iron courage. She can cook, she can fight, she can outwork any man in the valley. But the railroad has a forged deed, and men with guns. When the sheriff drags her to jail, her hymn rises through the bars, stirring a town that once mocked her. Will the ruthless man lay down his pride to save the woman he swore he'd never want before greed and violence tear everything away? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The trading post's wooden floor creaked beneath Nathan Boone's heavy boots as he shouldered his way through the door. 3 days of hard riding had left trail dust caked on his buckskins and a sour mood festering in his gut. The scarred mountain man's arrival drew wary glances from the townsfolk gathered around the pot-bellied stove, their conversations falling to whispers. Nathan dropped his bundle of furs on the counter with a thud. "Thompson," he called to the trader, his voice rough as pine bark. "Got prime beaver pelts here, worth good coin." The trader, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, nodded cautiously. "Welcome back, Boone. Been a spell since we seen you." The lamplight cast dancing shadows across Nathan's weathered face, highlighting the jagged scar that ran from his left temple to jaw. He'd earned that mark years ago in a tangle with a grizzly, and it served as a warning to others. Here was a man who'd faced death and won. "Whiskey?" Nathan demanded, slapping coins on the counter. "And none of that watered-down rotgut you serve the greenhorns." Thompson poured the drink with a steady hand, sliding it across the worn wood. The amber liquid caught the light like fool's gold. Nathan lifted the glass, aware of the eyes watching him. Let them stare. He'd long since stopped caring what civilized folk thought of him. The whiskey burned going down, warming his belly. Behind him, 2 young cowboys whispered and snickered, casting glances at a girl working in her father's store across the street. She was plain but pleasant-looking, with a fuller figure that spoke of comfort rather than privation. "Ain't right," one of the cowboys said, loud enough to carry. "Girl that size ought to watch what she eats." Nathan's lip curled. The wilderness had taught him that weakness meant death, and he had no patience for those who couldn't, or wouldn't, make themselves strong. The whiskey loosened his tongue, and he turned to face the room. "I'd never marry a fat girl," he declared, voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. "Don't need a woman who slows me down." The words fell like stones in still water, rippling outward. Some of the men chuckled nervously, while others looked away, embarrassed by his cruelty. The trading post fell quiet, save for the pop and crackle of the stove. Then the door swung open, bringing with it a blast of cold wind that set the lamps flickering. In stepped a woman bundled in wool shawls, her cheeks pink from the cold. She was young, probably in her late 20s, with a soft, rounded figure that spoke of good cooking and a settled life. Nathan recognized her kind, the sort who'd never known real hardship, who'd grown soft on store-bought sugar and Sunday socials. But something in the way she carried herself gave him pause. There was dignity in her bearing, a quiet strength that seemed at odds with her gentle appearance. The townsfolk turned as one, their faces showing a mix of concern and sympathy. Nathan's words still hung in the air like gun smoke after a shot, and it was clear from their reactions that this woman had heard every syllable. Instead of shrinking away, she lifted her chin. Pain flickered in her eyes, but she didn't let it break her. She unwrapped her shawl with steady hands, revealing a face that, while not beautiful by common standards, held a warmth that drew the eye. "Evening, Ms. Coulter," Preacher Davidson said, stepping forward to greet her. The older man's kind voice carried a rebuke for those who'd laughed at Nathan's words. "I've been hoping to speak with you about the matter of your inheritance." "Inheritance?" Thompson perked up behind the counter, always alert for news that might affect business. The preacher nodded, resting a paternal hand on the woman's shoulder. "Eli Coulter's last will and testament came through. Left his widow a fair piece of land up near Crystal Creek. Good water rights, fine grazing." A ripple of interest moved through the room. Land with water rights was worth more than gold in these parts, and a woman alone holding such property was bound to draw attention. Not all of it welcome. "Much obliged, preacher," The widow, Addison Coulter, said softly. Her voice was clear and steady, though Nathan caught the slight tremor in her hands as she gripped her shawl. I aim to honor Eli's dream for that land. Nathan scowled into his whiskey. A woman alone trying to work that kind of spread was asking for trouble. The mountains weren't kind to dreamers, no matter how determined they might be. He'd seen too many soft townsfolk break themselves against the wilderness, thinking their good intentions would be enough to tame it. But Addison Coulter didn't seem to notice his disapproval. She moved through the trading post with purpose, gathering supplies with the careful consideration of one who knew the value of every penny. Sugar, coffee, ammunition for a rifle. He noted that last with surprise. Not the usual purchases of a helpless widow. The townsfolk gave her space, but their whispers followed her like shadows. Some spoke of Eli Coulter's death 6 months past, taken by fever despite his wife's careful nursing. Others mentioned how she'd kept up the small farm they'd started, refusing help except when absolutely necessary. And a few, the ones who'd been in town longest, remembered how she'd faced ridicule in her younger days with the same quiet dignity she showed now. Nathan found himself watching her, despite his best intentions. There was something in the way she moved, deliberate but graceful, that didn't match his first impression. Her hands were work-worn, he noticed, not soft, like a town woman's should be, and when she reached for supplies on high shelves, she didn't ask for help but found her own way to manage. The preacher's voice dropped lower as he spoke with her about the inheritance, but fragments of their conversation carried. The land was good, but isolated. It would need work to make it profitable. And there were already rumors of others eyeing those water rights, men who wouldn't be particular about how they acquired them. I ain't afraid of hard work, preacher, Addison said, her voice carrying quiet conviction. Eli believed in that land. He saw something there worth building on, and I aim to see it through. Nathan knocked back the last of his whiskey, trying to drown the unwelcome stirring of respect. What did he care if some widow wanted to waste her time chasing her dead husband's dreams? The wilderness would teach her soon enough what it taught everyone. That hope was a luxury most couldn't afford. But as he turned to leave, his gaze met hers across the room. There was no challenge in her eyes, no anger at his earlier words. Instead, he saw something that made him look away first. Understanding, as if she could see past his cruel exterior to the scars that ran deeper than the one on his face. The trading post's usual buzz of conversation had resumed, but Nathan felt off balance, as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. He grabbed his payment for the furs and headed for the door, suddenly eager to be back in the mountains where things made sense. Behind him, Addison Coulter continued her shopping, standing tall despite the weight of whispers and doubts around her. As he stepped into the cold night air, Nathan tried to shake off the nagging feeling that something significant had just happened. He was a lone wolf, a man who'd chosen solitude over society's constraints. He had no business thinking about quiet strength or dignified widows or land that needed protecting. But as he mounted his horse, he caught a glimpse through the trading post window of Addison helping a child reach a candy jar, her face lit with genuine kindness. The sight stirred something he'd thought long buried. A memory of his own mother's gentle hands, of a time before the mountains had hardened him. Nathan turned his horse toward the hills, leaving the lamplight and warmth behind. The night wind carried the promise of snow, and he had miles to go before he could rest. But for the first time in years, the solitude of the trail ahead felt less like freedom and more like something else. Something he wasn't ready to name. Morning sunlight spilled across the dirt street as Addison Coulter made her way to the preacher's parsonage. Her worn boots kicked up small puffs of dust with each step. The papers from the lawyer's office crinkled in her tight grip. Precious as gold and twice as dangerous, she reckoned. The modest white-painted house sat back from the road, morning glories climbing the porch rails in tangles of purple and blue. Preacher Davidson's wife had always loved her flowers. Addison paused at the base of the steps, smoothing her skirts with trembling hands. The weight of what these papers meant pressed heavy on her heart. The preacher answered her knock with a warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Come in, Ms. Coulter. Sarah's just made fresh coffee." Inside, the parlor was neat but worn, like everything else the preacher owned. His wife brought coffee in their best cups, the ones with only one chip each, while Addison spread the papers on the small table. "It's all here in writing," she said, her finger tracing the formal script. "Eli left me the valley lot up by Crystal Creek, 160 acres, with the water rights clear as day." Preacher Davidson leaned forward, adjusting his spectacles. His weathered face grew serious as he read. "This is prime land, Ms. Coulter. Good soil, reliable water. The kind men fight over. I know. Addison's voice was soft but firm. Eli talked about it often enough. Said that valley could support a fine herd, maybe even an orchard where the ground slopes south. The preacher set down his coffee cup with a gentle clink. Then you should also know the Stockton cattle outfit's been eyeing that water access. And there's talk of the railroad wanting a right-of-way through that valley. I heard whispers in town. Addison's hands clasped tight in her lap. But it's my land, preacher. Legal and proper. Being legal don't always keep trouble at bay. He sighed, rubbing his gray-streaked temples. A woman alone with valuable property. Folks might see it as an opportunity. Outside the parsonage window, a cluster of women passed by. Their whispers carried through the morning air, along with quick glances toward the house. News traveled fast in small towns, spreading like wildfire through dry grass. I ain't afraid of hard work, Addison said, echoing her words from the night before. Or of what people might say. The preacher's wife touched her shoulder gently. It ain't just talk we're worried about, dear. Near the livery stable, Nathan Boone knelt beside his horse, checking its newly shod hooves. The smith had done good work, though the price had been steep. Mountain life was hard on horseshoes. Two men lounged against the coral fence nearby, their voices carrying clear in the morning air. Heard tell that Coulter widow's got herself quite the inheritance, one said, lighting a smoke. That Crystal Creek property's worth a pretty penny. More than pretty, his companion replied. Stockton's been trying to buy up water rights all through that valley. Railroad's sniffing around, too. Nathan's hand stilled on the horse's leg. He remembered the widow from the trading post, her quiet dignity in the face of his cruel words. Something about the men's tone made his neck prickle. Shame if something was to happen. The first man continued. Woman alone up there. No man to watch her back. Accidents happen in the wilderness. Nathan's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough accidents in his time to know what that meant. Standing, he led his horse away, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling in his gut. Wasn't his business what happened to some widow and her land? Evening found Addison at the boarding house supper table, surrounded by the usual mix of travelers and temporary residents. The landlady's cooking was plain but filling. Beef stew and fresh bread that filled the room with its warm scent. Pass the salt, if you please, Addison asked politely, pretending not to notice the smirks between two cowboys at the far end of the table. Careful now, one said, loud enough to carry. Wouldn't want to add to your figure, might make it hard to work that new property of yours. Laughter rippled down the table, though some looked away, embarrassed. Addison's hand trembled slightly as she seasoned her stew, but her voice remained steady. I reckon my figure's my own concern, she said. Just like my property. Now, ain't that sweet? The second cowboy drawled. But everyone knows a fat widow can't hold land. Takes a strong man to work a spread proper. The landlady's spoon cracked against a pot. That's enough of that talk at my table. But the damage was done. Addison finished her meal in silence, head held high despite the heat in her cheeks. When she rose to leave, her steps were measured, unhurried. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her run. In her small room, Addison lit the lamp with careful movements. The flame cast dancing shadows on the wall as she knelt beside her bed. The boarding house's thin walls couldn't quite muffle the continued laughter from below. She whispered, hands clasped tight. Give me strength to face what's coming. Eli believed in that land, believed in me. Help me be worthy of that faith. Outside, Nathan sat on the boarding house porch, rolling tobacco with practiced fingers. He'd taken a room for the night, telling himself it was the weather that kept him from heading back to his cabin. The sound of male laughter and crude jokes drifted through the windows. Stubborn woman, he muttered, striking a match against his boot. Asking for trouble, holding on to that land. But the words felt hollow, like excuses. He'd seen the dignity in her bearing at supper, the way she'd refused to let their mockery break her. It stirred something uncomfortable in his chest, something that felt too much like respect. The door creaked open, and Addison stepped out onto the porch. She started at the sight of him, then gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Evening, Mr. Boone. Nathan grunted in response, expecting her to hurry past. Instead, she moved to the porch rail, gazing out at the darkening street. I'm riding out to see my property tomorrow, she said quietly, as if speaking to herself. Need to know what I'm facing. Nathan's hand stilled in the act of rolling another cigarette. The men's words from the livery stable echoed in his mind. A woman alone in that valley would be asking for trouble. Might ride that way myself. he found himself saying, just to be curious about the lay of the land. Addison turned to look at him, surprise clear in her face. For a moment, neither spoke, measuring each other in the gathering dusk. I'd be obliged for the company, she finally said, her voice careful, neutral. Nathan nodded once, sharply, already wondering what he was getting himself into. But as Addison went back inside, her steps firm and purposeful, he couldn't quite regret his offer. Night settled over the town like a thick blanket. In her room, Addison packed a small bag for tomorrow's ride, her movements precise and determined. Across the street, Nathan cleaned his rifle by lamplight, telling himself he was just maintaining his equipment, not preparing for trouble. Two souls, separate yet somehow aligned by fate's strange turns, each preparing for what tomorrow might bring. The moon rose over the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley that waited for them, full of promise and danger in equal measure. Dawn painted the sky in soft pink and gold when Addison arrived at the preacher's house. Her shawl wrapped tight against the morning chill, she approached the weathered wagon hitched to an elderly mule. The preacher's wife stood nearby, wringing her hands. Are you certain about this, dear? That valley's a fair distance. I'm certain. Addison checked the wagon's contents. Basic supplies, tools, and the bedroll she'd packed before sunrise. The old mule flicked its ears, watching her with patient eyes. Behind them, hoofbeats announced Nathan Boone's arrival. He sat tall in his saddle, rifle across his lap, pretending not to notice them as he guided his horse past. Heading north, he called over his shoulder, though everyone knew the valley lay east. Just happened to be taking the same road for a spell. Addison hid a small smile, recognizing the lie for what it was. She'd seen the way he'd cleaned his rifle last night, how he'd packed his saddlebags with extra ammunition. The mountain man might claim indifference, but something had sparked his interest. Or his concern. The wagon creaked as Addison climbed onto the wooden seat. She gathered the reins with practiced hands, remembering how Eli had taught her to drive. The memory brought both pain and strength. Thank you for the loan, she told the preacher's wife. I'll return it soon as I can. The first mile passed easily enough, the mule plodding along the main road. Nathan rode ahead, his broad shoulders tense as he scanned the surrounding countryside. Addison kept her eyes on his back, finding odd comfort in his presence, despite his previous cruelty. The trouble started at Willow Creek. Spring rains had swollen the usually docile stream, and the crossing looked treacherous. The mule balked at the water's edge, ears laid back in stubborn refusal. Come on now, Addison urged, snapping the reins. The mule dug in its hooves, threatening to back the wagon into a ditch. Please, we need to cross. Nathan wheeled his horse around, watching her struggle. His face showed clear irritation, but something else flickered in his eyes. Reluctant respect for her persistence, perhaps. Finally, he dismounted with a grunt. You'll break an axle that way. He waded through the shallow water to take the mule's bridle. Ease up on those reins. Let him feel secure. Addison followed his instructions, and together they coaxed the mule forward. Water splashed the wagon wheels, but Nathan's steady hand kept them true. When they reached the far bank, he stepped back quickly, as if embarrassed by his help. Much obliged, Addison said softly. Nathan just mounted up and rode ahead. But his shoulders seemed less tense than before. By midday, the valley opened before them like a painting. Rich grassland stretched toward distant hills, framed by the crystal-clear creek that gave the property its name. A small cabin nestled against a stand of cottonwoods, its windows dark but its bones still strong. Addison's breath caught in her throat. Tears welled in her eyes as Eli's voice echoed in her. Memory. Just think. Love. With water like that, we could raise the finest cattle in the territory. Maybe plant some apple trees where the ground slopes gentle-like. It's perfect, she whispered, wiping her eyes with her shawl. Nathan had dismounted nearby, his experienced gaze taking in the lay of the land. Perfect means trouble, widow. Land this good draws vultures faster than a dead cow in summer. Then let them come. Addison climbed down from the wagon, her boots striking solid earth. Her earth. I aim to make this home, Mr. Boone. I aim to prove I'm worth something more than mockery. He studied her face, perhaps remembering his own cruel words at the trading post. Proving things to others is a fool's game. I'm proving it to myself, she replied quietly. The cabin's door hung crooked on broken hinges, and dust lay thick on the plank floor. But the roof was sound, and the stone fireplace stood ready. While Addison swept and sorted her supplies, Nathan grudgingly repaired the door, his powerful hands making quick work of the task. "Should hold now," he said, testing the swing, "though you'd do better to." He stopped himself, shaking his head. "Not my business how you manage." Addison knelt by the fireplace, laying kindling with careful precision. "You've been kind enough already, Mr. Boone. I won't ask for advice you don't want to give." The fire caught quickly, sending warm light dancing across the cabin's walls. Outside, the sun dipped toward the hills, painting the valley in rich golden hues. The first coyote's howl echoed across the grassland, answered by its pack. Nathan's hand moved to his rifle, but Addison was faster. She reached into the wagon and pulled out an old Sharps rifle, checking it with practiced ease that made Nathan's eyebrows rise. "Eli taught me," she explained, seeing his surprise. "Said a woman alone needs to handle herself." A sad smile touched her lips. Suppose he was right about that. They shared a simple supper of bread and beans, the fire crackling between them. Neither spoke much. Nathan from habit, Addison lost in thoughts of the future she'd build here. The coyotes sang their wild chorus, but she showed no fear, taking comfort in the cabin's solid walls and her own quiet strength. As night settled fully over the valley, Nathan rose to leave. He paused at the doorway, watching Addison arrange her bedroll near the fire's warmth. Her movements were sure, determined, as if she'd already claimed this space as her own. "I'll be camping by the creek tonight," he said gruffly. "Just to rest my horse, mind you. Nothing to do with," he gestured vaguely at the cabin. "Of course." Addison nodded, understanding what he wouldn't say. "Good night, Mr. Boone." He stepped out into the darkness, but his footsteps didn't immediately move away. Through the repaired door, Addison heard him settling on the porch, the soft click of his rifle being checked one final time. Inside, she lay down on her bedroll, watching the fire's glow paint shadows on the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight she was home. Outside, a mountain man who'd once mocked her sat guard, though he'd never admit it. And somewhere, she felt certain, Eli was smiling. Dawn painted the valley in soft pearl light when Addison woke. The cabin's wooden floor was hard beneath her bedroll, but she'd slept soundly, comforted by the solid walls and the knowledge of Nathan's presence outside. Through the window, she could see his campfire's dying embers by the creek. She stretched, then pulled her shawl tight against the morning chill. The door's new hinges worked smoothly as she stepped onto the porch, 2 wooden buckets in hand. Nathan sat against a tree, rifle across his knees, looking as if he hadn't slept at all. "Morning, Mr. Boone," she called softly. He grunted in response, watching as she made her way down the gentle slope to the creek. The water ran clear and sweet, perfect for drinking and cooking. Addison filled both buckets, remembering how she and Eli had planned to dig a proper well near the cabin. Back inside, she built up the fire and set water to boil. There was work to be done, and standing still wouldn't accomplish it. The cabin needed a thorough cleaning, the yard wanted clearing, and winter would come soon enough. She'd need a wood pile before then. Outside, she found an old axe leaning against the cabin wall. The handle was worn smooth from use, but the head was still sharp. Nathan watched skeptically as she tested its weight and balance. "Ain't your kind of work," he muttered. Addison said nothing, just lined up her first swing at a fallen log. The axe bit deep, and she worked it free with practiced ease. Another swing, and another. The rhythmic chopping filled the morning air. Nathan's eyebrows rose as she settled into a steady pace. "Where'd you learn that?" "Same place I learned to shoot," she replied between swings. Eli believed in being prepared. The wood split cleanly, and she paused to wipe her brow. "Said a woman ought to know how to manage, whether she's heavy or light, pretty or plain." Something shifted in Nathan's expression. Not quite respect, but perhaps a lessening of his scorn. He stood, stretching his tall frame. "Coffee still hot? Help yourself." They shared the morning brew in almost companionable silence, watching the sun climb higher. Addison had just finished her second cup when hoofbeats approached from the east. The preacher's familiar wagon appeared, dust rising behind it. "Morning, folks." The preacher climbed down, leather satchel in hand. "Thought I'd bring those papers out personally. Best to have everything legal and proper." Nathan's hand moved to his rifle, but another sound drew their attention. More riders approaching, these from the north. 3 men on fine horses, led by a well-dressed gentleman in an expensive coat. "Perfect timing," the stranger called out, his smile bright but cold. "I'm Silas Grayson, representing the Western Pacific Railroad Company." He dismounted with practiced grace, brushing dust from his sleeve. I see we're all here to discuss the property. Addison stood straighter, noting how his two companions kept their hands near their gun belts. There's nothing to discuss, Mr. Grayson. This land was my husband's, and now it's mine. Ah, but that's where you're mistaken, madam. Grayson pulled a folded document from his coat. You see, this deed clearly shows the railroad purchased this parcel 6 months ago. Quite legally, I assure you. The preacher frowned, opening his own satchel. That's not possible. I have Eli Coulter's original deed right here, properly witnessed and recorded. Things get complicated out here, Grayson said smoothly. Documents get lost. Records get confused. The railroad would be happy to compensate Mrs. Coulter for any misunderstanding. A generous offer, considering the circumstances. Nathan stepped forward, his scarred face dark with anger. Meaning what? Exactly. Grayson's smile never wavered. Simply that a woman alone might find it difficult to manage such a property. Accidents happen. Equipment breaks. Sometimes buildings catch fire. He shrugged elegantly. The frontier can be dangerous. That sounds mighty close to a threat, Nathan growled, his hand tightening on his rifle. Not at all. Grayson held up his hands in mock surrender. Just friendly advice. The railroad is willing to be reasonable. Say $500 for a quick sale? He turned to Addison. That's more than fair for someone in your position. Addison's cheeks burned, but her voice remained steady. This land is not for sale, Mr. Grayson. Not at any price. Now, don't be hasty. The lady said no. Nathan's rifle came up smoothly, not quite pointing at Grayson but definitely in his direction. Might want to ride on while you can. Grayson's companions reached for their guns but their boss waved them back. No, need for violence. We're all civilized people here. His cold eyes fixed on Addison. Think about my offer. Mrs. Coulter, life has a way of becoming very difficult for those who stand in progress's path. They watched the three men ride away, dust settling in their wake. The preacher shook his head, examining Grayson's deed. This is clever work. The paper's aged just right. The signatures look genuine, but it's false. Has to be. Won't matter none if they burn her out, Nathan said grimly. Railroad plays rough when they want something. Addison took the original deed from the preacher's hands, holding it like something precious. Eli died believing this would be our home. I won't dishonor that by running. The day passed in tense vigilance. Nathan rode the property's boundaries while Addison continued her work, refusing to let fear stop her. By sunset, she had a respectable woodpile stacked, and the cabin's interior was beginning to look livable. Night fell clear and cold, stars scattered like diamonds across the dark sky. Addison built up the fire, its warm light spilling through the cabin's windows. Outside, Nathan's boots creaked on the porch boards as he kept watch. Kneeling by her bedroll, Addison clasped her hands and began to pray aloud. Lord, you know the truth of things. If it's your will that I hold this land, please grant me strength and protection. And Lord. She paused, smiling slightly. Please help Mr. Boone find peace in his heart. He's a better man than he knows. Through the door, she heard Nathan's restless movement pause. For a long moment, silence held, broken only by the fire's gentle crackling. Then his deep voice rumbled through the door. You'll need help. I know, she replied softly. Railroad's powerful. Got money men, friends in high places. Won't stop just because you ask them nice. Then I won't ask nice. Addison stood, opening the door to face him. I'll fight them with truth and law first. If that fails. She met his eyes steadily. I'll fight them however I must. Nathan studied her face in the lamplight, seeing perhaps for the first time the steel beneath her gentle exterior. Might get ugly. Already is, Mr. Boone. Question is, will you help me? Or do you still think I'm not worth the trouble? He looked away, out across the darkened valley. His scarred face worked with some internal struggle. Finally, he sighed heavily. Reckon I'll stick around. Someone's got to teach you proper rifle work. He glanced back at her. Your stance was all wrong earlier. Addison bit back a smile. From Nathan Boone, that was practically a declaration of undying loyalty. Much obliged, Mr. Boone. Nathan, he corrected gruffly. If we're facing down the railroad together, might as well use my Christian name. She nodded, understanding the gesture's significance. Thank you, Nathan. He waved her thanks away. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we start planning how to hold this land proper. He settled back against the porch post, rifle ready across his knees. Railroad wants to play rough? Let's show them how mountain folk handle trouble. Addison returned to her bedroll, hearing Nathan's steady breathing through the door. Outside, a coyote called to its pack, wild and free in the darkness. She smiled, feeling stronger than she had since Eli's death. Let Grayson come with his false papers and threats. She had truth on her side, law in her hand, and a mountain man at her back. The fire burned low, its embers glowing like hope in the night. The autumn days marched steadily onward, each sunrise finding Addison already at work. Her determination showed in every task she tackled, from hauling water from the creek to mending the cabin's worn curtains. The morning frost barely slowed her as she prepared a small patch of earth for winter vegetables, turnips and cabbage that might sustain her through the cold months ahead. Nathan watched from his usual post, whittling new handles for her tools and keeping his rifle close. His keen eyes scanned the horizon regularly, searching for any sign of trouble. Though he wouldn't admit it aloud, he found himself impressed by her steady industry. "Ain't you ever tired?" he asked one morning, as she struggled with a particularly heavy water bucket. "Can't afford to," she replied, not breaking stride. "Work needs doing." Word of the widow's determination spread through the scattered homesteads. Visitors began appearing, some bearing gifts of preserved food or seeds, others carrying only judgment and sharp tongues. Mrs. Henderson from the next valley over brought a jar of pickled beans and thinly veiled pity. "It's not too late to sell, dear," she counseled, eyeing the modest cabin. "My sister in town has a spare room." Addison thanked her for the beans and changed the subject. Young Tom Fletcher and his wife stopped by with fresh eggs, genuine in their offer of friendship. But old Mr. Parker from the South Ridge came just to scoff, declaring loudly that no woman that size could manage alone. Through it all, Addison maintained her dignity. She offered each visitor the same warm welcome, whether they brought kindness or cruelty. Nathan noticed she never turned anyone away without offering refreshment, even those who deserved far less courtesy. The sun was setting one evening when 5 riders approached, their cattle brands well known in the territory. Nathan's hand moved to his rifle, but Addison was already stepping onto the porch. "Evening, Mrs. Coulter," the lead cattleman called out, his tone falsely pleasant. "Thought we'd stop by neighbor-like and have a word about your situation here." "You're welcome to come in for coffee," Addison replied calmly. "I just put a fresh pot on." The men exchanged glances, thrown off by her composure. Their spokesman continued, "Thing is, ma'am, this valley's been open range for cattle since before your husband ever saw it. Come spring, we'll be driving herds through here same as always." "I understand," Addison said, already pouring coffee into tin cups. "You're welcome to cross my land, long as you mind the garden plot and stay clear of the creek bank where I'll be planting." "Now, see here," another rider burst out. "You don't seem to understand. This ain't no place for—" "Sugar?" Addison interrupted, holding out a cup. "I'm afraid I'm low on cream, but the coffee's strong and hot." Nathan watched in amazement as she systematically dismantled their threatening posture with simple hospitality. It was hard to maintain menace while balancing a coffee cup and accepting an offered biscuit. The cattlemen left looking somewhat bewildered, their warnings about leaving before spring sounding hollow even to their own ears. After they'd gone, Nathan shook his head. "Never seen the like. You turned them mean old bulls into confused calves, with just coffee and kind words." Addison's smile held a touch of sadness. "People expect me to be ashamed of my size, of being alone, of daring to hold this land. When I refuse shame, it confuses them." The wind picked up as night fell, rattling the shutters Nathan had recently repaired. Inside the cabin, Addison stirred the fire while Nathan brought in more wood. The howling wind and warm firelight created an unexpected intimacy that loosened tongues. "Been this way since I was a girl," Addison said softly, watching the flames. "Too big, too plain, too much of everything people thought a lady shouldn't be. Mama fretted herself sick over finding me a husband." She smiled at the memory. Then Eli came along. He was the first person who ever made me feel exactly right, exactly as I am. Nathan sat quietly, his usual gruffness softened by the firelight and her words. "He had dreams, my Eli. Saw this valley and knew it could be home. We were going to build something fine here, together." Her voice caught. "Fever took him before we could start. But his dream, that's still alive. That's what I'm holding on to." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Nathan studied his scarred hands, thinking of his own lonely years in the mountains. the walls he'd built against caring. A new sound drew their attention, horses approaching, but with a different rhythm than white men's mounts. Nathan was on his feet instantly, but his tension eased as he recognized the visitors. Running Deer's family, he explained to Addison. Good people. I've hunted with them many seasons. The Comanche family dismounted gracefully. Running Deer, his wife Many Stars, their 2 children, and his mother, whom Nathan addressed respectfully as elder sister. Addison welcomed them without hesitation, bringing out food and fresh water. Many Stars offered dried berries in return, while the children watched Addison with curious eyes. Elder sister observed everything with quiet wisdom, noting how Addison treated her family with natural respect, not the stiff politeness many settlers showed. They shared a meal together, Nathan translating when needed, though much was communicated through gestures and smiles. The children were delighted when Addison showed them how to make shadow puppets on the cabin wall. Before leaving, elder sister took Addison's hands in hers. In halting English, she said, "You have strong heart, like deep roots of old tree, not afraid to stand alone." She pressed a small medicine pouch into Addison's palm, for protection and courage. Nathan translated the rest of her words. She says the land knows its true friends. Those who tend it with love will find it faithful. Watching them ride away into the gathering darkness, Nathan saw Addison touch the medicine pouch gently before tucking it into her apron pocket. Something had changed in how he saw her. Not just her size or her solitude, but the quiet strength that ran deep as a mountain stream. Later that night, as the fire burned low, Addison's voice rose soft and clear in an old hymn. Nathan sat on the porch, rifle across his knees, listening. The simple melody carried more beauty than any music he'd heard in years of wandering. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. The words drifted through the cabin walls, touching something long buried in his heart. He found himself remembering his mother singing that same hymn, back before the mountains claimed him, before scars and solitude became his only companions. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. Nathan closed his eyes, letting the gentle notes wash over him. For the first time in longer than he could remember, the night felt less lonely, the darkness less complete. Inside the cabin, Addison's voice carried hope as naturally as breath. And Nathan Boone, hardened mountain man, felt his own heart softening like spring snow in the Sunday. The song ended, leaving only the whisper of wind in the trees and the distant call of a night bird. Nathan sat motionless, afraid to break the spell of the moment. Inside, he heard Addison banking the fire for the night, her quiet movements a comfort in the darkness. Dawn brought a hushed stillness to the valley as the first snowflakes began their gentle descent. They drifted down like tiny white feathers, dusting the cabin's roof and the bare branches of nearby trees. Addison stood at the doorway, watching the transformation with quiet wonder. The morning air held that special crispness that only comes with the season's first snow. Inside the cabin, a pot of stew bubbled over the hearth fire, filling the air with the rich aroma of beef, carrots, and potatoes. Addison had risen early to start the meal, knowing they would need something hearty before heading into town. Through the window, she could see Nathan's powerful form as he split firewood, his axe rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The sound of splitting wood echoed across the yard. Nathan's breath came out in white puffs as he worked, adding to the growing pile of split logs. His movements were precise and efficient, born from years of survival in the mountains. The snow was beginning to stick now, transforming the landscape into a white blanket. Addison stepped out onto the porch, pulling her shawl tight. "Stew's almost ready," she called. "Best come in before it gets cold." Nathan nodded, setting one last log on the chopping block. The axe bit deep, and the wood surrendered with a satisfying crack. He gathered an armful of split logs and carried them to the porch, stamping his boots before entering. They ate in comfortable silence, the stew warming them from the inside. Addison had learned that Nathan preferred quiet to conversation, especially in the morning. She respected that, finding her own peace in the simple routine they had developed. "Town's waiting," Nathan said finally, pushing back his empty bowl. "Snow's likely to get worse before it gets better." Addison nodded, already reaching for her heavy coat. They had supplies to fetch, and waiting wasn't an option. She wrapped leftover stew in a cloth for later, while Nathan readied the horses. The ride into town was slow going. Snow continued to fall, coating their shoulders and the horses' manes in white. Addison rode her old mare, while Nathan led the pack mule they would need for supplies. The usually dusty trail had transformed into a hushed white path, their horses' hooves making soft prints in the fresh snow. As they approached the town, the familiar knot formed in Addison's stomach. She could already imagine the stares, the whispers, the barely concealed sneers. But she held her head high, remembering her late husband's words. Pride ain't about what others think of you. It's about what you know of yourself. The first whispers started as soon as they tied their horses outside the trading post. Two women hurried past, their heads bent together in gossip. The fat widow and that wild mountain man, living out there alone together. Scandalous, if you ask me. Nathan's jaw tightened, but Addison touched his arm lightly. Let them talk, she said softly. Words can't harm what they don't understand. Inside the trading post, the usual crowd parted like water, creating a path for them. Addison moved with purposeful dignity toward the counter, her list clutched in hand. Good morning, Mr. Thompson, she greeted the shopkeeper. I'll need 10 pounds of flour, a box of nails, and some coffee if you have it. While Thompson gathered her supplies, Nathan prowled the edges of the store, his keen ears catching fragments of conversation. Near the back, he noticed several ranchers huddled with Silas Grayson, their voices low but intent. Railroad's got plans for that valley. Won't take much to discourage a woman alone. Before spring, planting. Nathan's hand instinctively moved to his knife, but he forced himself to remain still. Better to know their plans than show his hand too soon. Addison paid for her supplies, ignoring the stares and mutters. She handled each transaction with grace, thanking Thompson with genuine warmth despite his barely concealed disdain. The preacher appeared as they were loading the supplies, his kind face creased with concern. Mrs. Coulter, won't you and Mr. Boone join me for supper? Martha's made her famous chicken and dumplings. The invitation was a lifeline of friendship in a sea of hostility. Addison accepted gratefully, while Nathan gave a grunt that passed for agreement. The preacher's home was modest but warm, filled with the aroma of good cooking and the gentle presence of his wife Martha. They ate at a simple table, the meal made special by genuine fellowship. I want to thank you both, Addison said softly, looking at the preacher and his wife, for standing by me when others wouldn't. The Lord calls us to love our neighbors, Martha replied, reaching across to squeeze Addison's hand. All our neighbors. Nathan sat in brooding silence, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. The warmth of the room seemed to make him uncomfortable, as if kindness was harder to bear than cruelty. They were just finishing when urgent knocking interrupted the meal. A telegram rider, snow-dusted and stamping his feet, handed the preacher a yellow envelope. For Mrs. Coulter, he announced, marked urgent. The preacher passed it to Addison, who opened it with trembling fingers. Her face paled as she read the brief message. The railroad, she said quietly. They're pressing their claim. Their lawyers will be here within weeks to resolve the matter. Her voice caught on the last words. Resolve means remove, Nathan growled, speaking for the first time since they'd sat down. They aim to take what's yours, legal or not. I won't yield. Addison's voice was firm despite her pale face. This land was Eli's dream. It's my home now. I won't be driven off by false papers and fancy lawyers. Nathan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. His face was set in hard lines, but his eyes held something new. Determination, and perhaps something deeper. Then I reckon I'll be standing beside you when they come, he said gruffly. Can't let you face those vultures alone. The ride back to the cabin was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than before. The snow had stopped, leaving the world wrapped in white stillness. Their breath made clouds in the cold air, and their horses' hooves made soft crunching sounds in the fresh snow. Back at the cabin, Addison lit the lamp while Nathan brought in more firewood. The familiar tasks felt different now, weighted with new meaning. They had declared themselves allies in town today, facing the whispers and prejudice together. There was no going back from that. Nathan sat by the fire, the steady scrape of his whetstone against his knife blade a counterpoint to the crackling flames. Addison moved about the cabin, putting away supplies and hanging her shawl to dry. The lamp cast a warm glow over the scene. The mountain man, sharpening his blade, the widow tending her home. Both of them bound now by something stronger than circumstance. Outside, the snow-covered valley lay quiet under the rising moon, holding its secrets close. In the warmth of the cabin, Nathan tested his knife's edge with his thumb, satisfied with its sharpness. He hadn't spoken since his declaration in town, but his presence said everything necessary. He would stay. He would fight. Some commitments didn't need words to be understood. The lamp flickered as Addison added more oil, its light steady and sure against the gathering night. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But for now, they had this moment of peace. Two outcasts who had found unexpected alliance in each other's strength. The days following the telegram brought bitter cold and deepening snow. Morning after morning, Addison woke to find frost patterns on the inside of the cabin windows, delicate swirls that spoke of the harsh weather outside. The temperature kept dropping, and with it came new challenges they hadn't expected. Nathan stood at the cabin door, watching as another snow squall moved in across the valley. "Storm's getting worse," he said gruffly. "Need to shore up these walls before it really hits." Addison nodded, already gathering old newspapers and rags she'd been saving. "I noticed a draft by the north window last night, cold enough to freeze the washwater solid." They worked methodically through the morning, stuffing every crack and crevice they could find with paper and cloth. Addison used a kitchen knife to pack material deep between the logs, while Nathan hammered extra boards across the most vulnerable spots. The cabin was crude, built hastily by someone who hadn't planned on winter living, but they were determined to make it sturdy enough to survive. "Hold this," Nathan ordered, positioning a plank while Addison braced it steady. His hands were sure with the hammer, each nail driven home with practiced efficiency. The sound of his work echoed across the snow-covered yard, sharp and purposeful. By midday, they'd moved to gathering firewood. The existing woodpile wouldn't last through what was coming. Nathan felled trees while Addison helped drag and stack the logs. Her cheeks were red with cold and effort, but she never complained. Even when the work left her hands raw and bleeding, Nathan watched her haul another armload of wood, noting how she ignored the weight and the cold. He'd known experienced trappers who'd quit easier work than this. Yet here she was, this woman everyone in town had dismissed, working from sunrise to sunset without a word of protest. Inside the cabin, Addison kept a pot of beans simmering on the stove, adding chunks of salt, pork, and dried vegetables whenever the levels got low. The hearty smell filled the small space, making it feel more like a home than just shelter. She'd taken to cooking extra, knowing Nathan would need the energy for the heavy work ahead. Late one afternoon, while checking his trap lines, Nathan spotted Addison at the creek. She was struggling with a heavy water bucket, trying to break through ice that had formed since morning. The cold had made the path treacherous, and she was having trouble keeping her footing. Without a word, he strode down the bank. Addison looked up, startled, as he took the bucket from her hands. Their eyes met briefly in the fading light. No words passed between them, but something shifted in that moment. An understanding perhaps, or a recognition of the partnership they'd formed against the elements and their enemies. That evening, after a supper of beans and cornbread, Addison noticed Nathan's coat hanging by the fire, torn at the shoulder and fraying at the cuffs. Without asking, she took up needle and thread, working by lamplight to mend the worn garment. Nathan watched her from his place by the fire, her fingers moving steadily through the fabric. "Ain't necessary," he muttered, uncomfortable with the attention. "Necessary is exactly what it is," Addison replied calmly, not looking up from her work. "Can't have you freezing because of pride." The next morning brought more snow, the flakes falling thick and fast. They worked together to bring the animals into the lean-to shelter Nathan had built against the cabin wall. Addison's old mare and Nathan's horse stood close together for warmth, while the mule complained about the tight quarters. "Never seen a winter set in so hard, so fast," Nathan commented, spreading fresh hay for the animals. "The Lord provides," Addison said simply, checking that the water bucket hadn't frozen. Nathan snorted softly but didn't argue. He'd noticed how she met every challenge with the same quiet faith, as if certainty of God's care made the work lighter somehow. That evening, after the chores were done and supper cleared away, Addison knelt by her bed as she always did. Nathan sat in his usual spot by the fire, pretending to focus on cleaning his rifle while she prayed. "Lord," she began softly, "thank you for this day's blessings, for the strength to work and the shelter from the storm. Thank you for sending Nathan to help when I needed it most. Watch over him, Lord. Keep him safe as he watches over me." Nathan's hands stilled on his rifle. Hearing his name spoken in prayer stirred something in him, something he'd thought long buried under years of solitude and bitterness. He wasn't used to being thanked, wasn't comfortable with gratitude or dependence. Yet here was this woman, naming him before her God as if he were worthy of divine attention. The lamp flickered as the wind picked up outside, casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls. Addison finished her prayers and rose, moving quietly about her evening routine. Nathan remained by the fire, troubled by emotions he couldn't name. Through the window, they could see the storm approaching, a wall of white moving across the darkening valley. The wind grew stronger, making the cabin creak and groan. But inside, the lamp burned steady, its light a warm defiance against the gathering night. Addison added more wood to the stove, banking it carefully to last through the cold hours ahead. The familiar tasks of securing the cabin for night took on new significance as the storm drew closer. Every rattle of the shutters reminded them of their vulnerability, yet also of their preparation. Nathan moved to check the door's heavy bar one last time, his movements automatic after weeks of the same routine. The wind howled outside, but the cabin held steady, warmed by the fire and made secure by their combined efforts. The lamp's glow filled the small space, turning the rough-hewn walls golden. It caught the steam rising from Addison's cup of tea, the worn fabric of Nathan's freshly mended coat, the simple tools of their survival laid ready for tomorrow's work. These humble things had become precious through use and necessity, marking the progress of their days together. As the storm closed in around them, the cabin stood as a fortress of warmth and light against the wilderness. Within its walls, two people who had begun as strangers found themselves bound together by work, respect, and the simple act of survival. The lamp burned steady in the window, a beacon against the gathering dark, while outside the snow continued to fall. The blizzard struck with savage force that night. Wind howled through the valley like a wild thing, rattling the cabin's walls and driving snow through every tiny crack. Nathan stood at the window, watching the white fury descend until visibility dropped to nothing beyond the glass. "Never seen it blow in this fierce," he muttered, turning back to where Addison was counting their supplies on the rough-hewn table. "Might be stuck here a spell." Addison nodded, her face calm as she sorted through their stores. "We've got flour enough for bread, dried beans, salt pork, and some preserves." She looked up at him. "If we're careful, we can stretch it." The first day of confinement passed slowly. The wind screamed outside while they tended the fire, melted snow for water, and spoke little. Nathan paced like a caged mountain lion, checking the windows and door every hour. Addison kept her hands busy with mending and cooking, humming softly to herself as she worked. When morning came again, the storm showed no sign of letting up. Addison rose from her bed, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and began to sing. Her clear voice filled the cabin with the familiar words of "Amazing Grace." Nathan groaned from his bedroll near the fire. "Ain't it too early for that?" "Never too early to praise the Lord," Addison replied, continuing to the next verse. Her voice grew stronger as she moved about, starting breakfast with the same efficiency she showed in all tasks. By the third morning, cabin fever had set in hard. The walls seemed to close in tighter with each passing hour. Nathan sat cleaning his rifle for the fourth time when Addison's voice rose again in song. "Rock of Ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee." This time, something in the familiar melody caught in Nathan's throat. Without meaning to, he found himself humming along, his deep voice a rough counterpoint to her sweet tones. Addison smiled but didn't comment, knowing any mention might make him stop. Instead, she moved on to another hymn, and gradually, Nathan's humming grew more confident. That evening, as they huddled near the fire with bowls of bean soup, Nathan broke their usual silence. "Had a Bible once," he said suddenly, staring into the flames. "My mama's, little thing bound in red leather, pages thin as onion skin." Addison set her bowl down, listening quietly. She used to read it every night, even after working 16 hours in the laundry. His voice grew distant with memory. "Died when I was 12. Fever took her quick. I carried that Bible with me into the mountains. Read it sometimes when the loneliness got bad." He paused, shadows dancing across his scarred face. "Lost it in a river crossing. Spring of 49. Felt like losing her all over again." "The words stay in your heart," Addison said softly. "Even when the book is gone." Nathan nodded, then continued talking as if a dam had broken. He spoke of his years in the high country, of learning to trap from an old mountain man who'd later died in an avalanche. He told of winters spent in snow caves, of close calls with grizzlies, of trading with the Comanche and learning their ways. Addison listened intently, asking gentle questions that drew out more stories. Her eyes held no judgment, only compassion for the hard road he'd walked. The wind continued to howl outside, but the cabin felt warmer somehow, filled with words instead of silence. On the third night, as darkness pressed against the windows, a new sound cut through the storm's roar. A high, Wavering howl rose above the wind, followed by answering yips and snarls. "Coyotes," Nathan said, reaching for his rifle. "Storm's got them desperate. They'll try for the livestock." The animals shifted nervously in their lean-to shelter, steam rising from their bodies in the cold. The predators' cries grew closer, more insistent. Nathan moved toward the door, rifle ready, but Addison was faster. She grabbed the lantern and threw the door wide, stepping out into the swirling snow. The light blazed in her hand as she swung it back and forth, her voice ringing out strong and clear. "Get away from here. Go on now." The coyote's eyes gleamed in the darkness, reflecting the lantern's flame. Addison took another step forward, completely unafraid. "I said get." She stamped her foot hard, the sound sharp against the packed snow. The coyotes hesitated, then melted away into the storm like smoke. Addison stood for a moment longer, lantern held high, making sure they were truly gone. When she turned back to the cabin, she found Nathan staring at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Suddenly, his face cracked into a grin, and a sound burst from him that took her by surprise. Laughter, deep and genuine, rusty from disuse but real. "Never seen anything like that," he managed between chuckles. "You scared those coyotes worse than my rifle would have." His laughter was infectious, and soon Addison joined in. They stood in the doorway, their mirth rising up to join the wind's song, transforming it into something less lonely. By morning, the storm had spent itself. The wind died away to nothing, leaving behind a pristine world of white. Addison stepped out onto the porch, Nathan close behind her. The sun broke through the clouds, setting the snow-covered valley ablaze with diamond light. Every branch wore a coating of ice that sparkled like crystal, transforming the ordinary landscape into something magical. They stood together in the silence, their breath making small clouds in the crisp air. The beauty before them needed no words. It spoke directly to the soul, a reminder of why they fought so hard to keep this land. Addison's face glowed with wonder as she took in the transformed valley. Even Nathan seemed softened by the sight, his usual scowl replaced by quiet appreciation. The world felt new-made, scrubbed clean by the storm's fury and renewed by its passing. In the distance, a cardinal's bright red feathers flashed against the snow as it flew from branch to branch, nature's first touch of color returning to the white landscape. After 3 days confined together in the cabin, something had shifted between them. The silence they shared now was comfortable, built on understanding rather than distance. They had weathered the storm not just as reluctant allies but as something closer to friends. The morning light caught the ice crystals in Addison's hair, turned there by the storm's last breath. Nathan found himself noticing how her eyes reflected the sky's impossible blue, how her smile seemed as bright as the sun on snow. They stood together on the porch, marveling at the morning's glory, their shoulders nearly touching. The beauty around them seemed to echo something growing within, a warmth that no winter cold could touch, a light that no storm could dim. The morning sun melted patches of snow into gleaming puddles as Addison and Nathan prepared for the Sunday church service. Winter's iron grip had finally loosened, bringing with it the first whispers of spring. Addison stood before her small mirror, carefully pinning her hair and adjusting the worn shawl that had belonged to her late husband, Eli. The soft wool still carried memories of his kindness. Nathan waited outside, oddly fidgety in his cleanest shirt. He'd scraped the mud from his boots and even attempted to tame his wild beard. When Addison emerged from the cabin, he couldn't help noticing how the morning light caught the auburn highlights in her hair. "Ready?" she asked, settling her Bible in the crook of her arm. Nathan merely nodded, falling into step beside her as they began the walk into town. The road was rutted with melting snow, but they found their way around the worst spots. Their shoulders nearly touched as they walked, a subtle unity in their matched stride. The church bell rang across the valley, calling the faithful to worship. As they approached the white-painted building, heads turned. Whispers rustled like dry leaves among the gathering townspeople. Some stared openly at the unlikely pair, the rounded widow and the scarred mountain man walking side by side to Sunday service. Nathan's jaw tightened at the scrutiny, but Addison held her head high. She'd weathered worse storms than curious eyes. Together they climbed the church steps, their boots echoing on the wooden boards. Inside, the morning sun streamed through tall windows, painting golden stripes across the wooden pews. The preacher stood at the door, greeting his flock. His eyebrows rose slightly at seeing Nathan, but he smiled, warmly. "Miss Addison, Brother Nathan, welcome to the Lord's house this morning." They found seats near the back, where Nathan could keep his eye on both doors. Old habits died hard. The organ wheezed to life, and the congregation rose to sing. Nathan stood silent, while Addison's clear voice joined the hymn, lifting Amazing Grace to the rafters. The preacher took his place behind the pulpit, opening his Bible to Matthew chapter 17. His sermon rang out strong and clear through the sunlit church. "Faith," he proclaimed, "can move mountains." His eyes found Addison and Nathan in their pew. When the world tells you something cannot be done, when powerful men say you must yield, remember that faith stronger than any mountain stands behind you. Nathan shifted uncomfortably, feeling the weight of the preacher's words. Beside him, Addison sat straight-backed, her hands folded calm in her lap. The sermon continued, speaking of David facing Goliath, of Daniel in the lion's den, tales of the faithful standing firm against overwhelming odds. More than once, the preacher's gaze returned to them, making it clear who inspired today's message. When the final hymn ended and the congregation began to stir, children darted between the pews toward Addison. They knew her routine by now. Every Sunday she brought a basket of cookies, simple sugar cookies shaped like stars and hearts. Their small faces glowed with anticipation as she handed them out. "Thank you, Miss Addison," they chorused, clutching their treats. Nathan watched from his place by the wall, surprised by the warm feeling in his chest. Addison's gentle ways with the children, her quiet dignity in the face of town gossip, her unwavering faith, all of it stirred something he'd thought long dead within him. The mothers approached next, sharing news and extending cautious invitations to sewing circles. Nathan noticed how they glanced his way, curious about his presence but not quite brave enough to ask questions. As they walked home, the afternoon sun warm on their backs, Addison hummed hymns under her breath. Nathan found himself keeping time with his steps, though he'd never admit it aloud. Back at the cabin, they settled into their evening routine. Nathan built up the fire while Addison prepared coffee. The familiar scent of wood smoke and coffee beans filled the air as day faded to dusk. They carried their cups out to the porch, where two rough-hewn chairs waited. The evening star had just appeared, a bright point in the darkening sky. Addison wrapped her husband's shawl tighter against the cooling air. "Sometimes," she said softly, "I wake up afraid." Her words floated out into the gathering darkness. "Not of what people say about me. I've heard worse since I was a girl. But losing this land..." She paused, gathering her thoughts. Eli loved this valley. He saw what it could be. A home, a future. Losing it would be like losing the last piece of him I have left. Nathan studied his coffee cup, turning it slowly in his scarred hands. "Won't happen," he said firmly. "Railroad men, cattle barons, they don't know what they're up against." He looked at her then, his eyes serious in the fading light. "I gave my word I'd help you fight for this land, and I mean to keep it." Addison's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she smiled. "Thank you, Nathan. Having you here, it means more than I can say." They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to pepper the sky. Their shoulders touched lightly, neither moving away. The connection between them had grown like a young tree, slowly, steadily, its roots reaching deep into shared struggles and quiet moments of understanding. A whippoorwill called from the darkness, its lonely song echoing across the valley. But here on the porch, 2 cups of cooling coffee on the rail, and stars wheeling overhead, loneliness seemed a distant memory. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together. The widow and the mountain man, bound by something stronger than circumstance. Nathan glanced at Addison's profile, peaceful in the starlight. The rigid walls he'd built around his heart had developed hairline cracks, letting in warmth he'd forgotten how to feel. He turned his eyes back to the stars, but the quiet contentment remained. The night deepened around them, but neither moved to go inside. They sat shoulder to shoulder, their breath creating small clouds in the cool air, while the stars kept their ancient vigil overhead. In that moment, words seemed unnecessary. Their trust in each other spoke volumes in the comfortable silence they shared. The wagon wheels creaked as Addison and Nathan made their way back from town, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the muddy road. Spring had begun to paint the valley in soft greens, but today neither of them noticed the beauty. Something felt wrong. Nathan sat straight in his saddle, scanning the tree line with narrowed eyes. As they rounded the final bend toward the cabin, Nathan's hand moved to his rifle. "Hold up," he called to Addison, who pulled the wagon to a stop. In the distance, their fence line looked wrong, jagged where it should have been straight. Nathan dismounted, his boots squelching in the half-thawed earth. He approached the nearest fence post, running his hand along splintered wood where someone had taken an axe to it. Fresh cuts marked at least 6 posts, leaving the fence sagging like a broken arm. "Addison," he called, his voice tight. "Stay with the wagon." But she was already walking toward him, her skirts gathered above the mud. Her face paled at the sight of the damaged fence, but her voice remained steady. "When did this happen?" "Recent," Nathan growled, examining the raw wood. "Day, maybe 2 at most." They followed the line of destruction: cut posts, trampled grass, marks of multiple horses. Near the creek, they found the remnants of a campfire. Ashes still, carrying the ghost of warmth. Coffee grounds scattered nearby told of men who'd made themselves at home on Addison's land. "Grayson's men," Nathan said, crouching to examine boot prints in the soft earth. "Making a point, showing they can come and go as they please." Addison stood very still, her late husband's shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. "They want us to feel afraid," she said softly. "Want us to give up and run." Nathan straightened, brushed dried mud from his knees. "They don't know you very well then." A hint of a smile touched Addison's lips, but her eyes remained worried. "We should get the wagon unloaded before dark." They worked quickly, storing supplies and repairing what damage they could to the fence. As twilight settled over the valley, Nathan insisted on making a patrol of the property. Addison watched from the porch as his figure disappeared into the gathering darkness, his rifle gleaming dully in the last light. Inside the cabin, Addison lit the lantern and placed it in the window where its glow would reach across the yard. She heard Nathan's voice in her memory, telling her it made her a target, made the cabin too visible. But tonight, she needed that light. It was more than illumination, it was defiance, a beacon declaring that this land had an owner who wouldn't be frightened away. Days passed with growing tension. Nathan took to sleeping in the barn, his rifle close at hand. Every morning, Addison would find him already awake, checking the property line for fresh signs of intruders. Dark circles grew under his eyes, but he waved away her concerns. The lantern burned every night, its flame steady against the darkness. Sometimes Addison would wake in the small hours to find Nathan standing guard by the window, his figure silhouetted against the light. She'd hear him pacing, boots quiet on the wooden floor, until dawn painted the sky pink. On the 4th evening, as Addison prepared supper, the sound of horses approached fast. Nathan burst through the door, blood streaming from a cut above his eye and his shirt torn at the shoulder. "Nathan!" Addison rushed to him, reaching for his arm. He tried to shake her off. "I'm fine. Just a scuffle with some of Grayson's hired men." He winced as he moved. "They won't be back tonight, at least." "Sit down," Addison ordered, her voice brooking no argument. She pulled her medical kit from its shelf, a collection of supplies she'd hoped not to need. Nathan sank heavily into a chair, his breathing ragged. Addison poured water into a basin and gathered clean cloths. When she turned back, Nathan was trying to stand. "Don't need fussing over," he muttered. "Just need to make sure they're gone." "They're gone," Addison said firmly, pressing him back into the chair. "And you need tending." She dipped a cloth in the water and began cleaning the blood from his face. Her touch was gentle but sure, ignoring his attempts to pull away. "Been taking care of my own wounds for 20 years, he protested. But there was less fight in his voice. "And I'm sure you've done a fine job of it," Addison replied calmly. "But tonight you don't have to." She worked steadily, washing away blood and dirt to reveal the cut underneath. "This needs stitching." Nathan started to object, but Addison was already threading a needle. She held it in the lantern flame, then began her careful work. Her hands remained steady as she stitched, though her heart ached at his poorly concealed winces. "My father was a doctor," she said softly, focusing on her task. "He taught me how to do this properly. Said everyone should know how to help heal." Nathan sat silent under her ministrations, his rigid posture gradually relaxing as she worked. When she finished with his face, she turned her attention to his shoulder, helping him ease the torn shirt away from the injury. "They had knives," he admitted grudgingly. "3 of them. Thought they'd scare me off with a beating." A grim smile touched his lips. "They learned different." Addison cleaned the shallow slash on his shoulder, her touch professional but tender. "Violence doesn't have to answer violence," she said quietly. "There's strength in mercy too." "That's not how the world works," Nathan replied, but his voice held more weariness than conviction. "Maybe not," Addison agreed, applying a healing salve to the wound. "But it's how I choose to work in the world." She began bandaging his shoulder with careful movements. "Someone has to begin the cycle of mercy, or we're all just wolves tearing at each other forever." Nathan watched her face as she worked, noting the gentle determination in her expression. Here was strength of a different kind than he'd known, not in fists or firearms, but in steady hands that chose to heal instead of harm. When she finished, Addison stepped back to examine her work. "You'll need to rest that shoulder," she said. "No more patrols tonight." "Can't let my guard down," Nathan protested, but his body betrayed him with a wave of exhaustion. "The lantern will keep watch," Addison said firmly, helping him to the bedroll near the fire. "Tonight, you rest and heal." Too tired to argue further, Nathan eased himself down by the hearth. The fire's warmth seeped into his aching muscles, and the soft sounds of Addison moving about the cabin created a peaceful atmosphere he hadn't known he was missing. "I was wrong about you," he said suddenly, his voice rough with fatigue. "That first day at the trading post, said cruel things without knowing you. I was wrong." Addison paused in her work, a small smile touching her lips. "I know," she said simply, "and I forgave you long ago." The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the lantern's light reached into the darkness, steady and unwavering. Nathan felt the weight of years of loneliness and bitterness beginning to lift, replaced by something warmer, something that felt surprisingly like hope. He watched through, heavy eyes as Addison moved around the cabin, humming softly as she prepared a late supper. The smell of coffee and warm bread filled the air. His wound still ached, but somehow the pain seemed less important than this moment of peace, of being cared for by hands that chose gentleness over fear. Sleep began to pull at him, but he fought it for a moment longer. "Addison?" She turned from the stove. "Yes, thank you," he said simply, meaning far more than just the medical care. Her smile was soft in the firelight. "Rest now," she said. "Tomorrow will bring its own battles." Nathan closed his eyes, feeling safer than he had in years. The last thing he heard before drifting off was Addison's quiet humming and the gentle click of her knitting needles, keeping watch over his dreams. The first whispers of spring drifted through the valley like a gentle promise. Tiny green shoots pushed through the thawing earth, and the creek ran fuller with melting snow from the high country. Morning frost still painted the grass silver, but by midday the sun brought warmth enough for working outdoors. Addison knelt in the freshly turned soil of her garden plot, carefully placing pea seeds in neat rows. She had marked the rows with string, just as her mother had taught her years ago. The earth felt cool and damp between her fingers as she worked, and hope bloomed in her heart along with each seed she planted. From above came the steady rhythm of Nathan's hammering as he replaced worn shingles on the cabin roof. The sound had become familiar, almost comforting, like the heartbeat of their shared home. Addison paused in her planting to watch him work, admiring the efficient way he moved across the roof boards. "Mind those clouds rolling in," she called up to him. "Looks like rain before sunset." Nathan glanced at the western sky, then nodded. "Reckon you're right. Few more boards ought to do it, though." He drove another nail home with practiced skill. "How's that garden coming?" "Peas are nearly all in. Then I'll start on the carrots." Addison sat back on her heels, wiping her brow with her sleeve. "My mother always said plant peas at the first spring moon, and they'll grow strong before summer heat." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," Nathan replied, his voice warmer than it would have been months ago. Their teamwork had grown natural over the winter weeks, each anticipating the other's needs without words. When Nathan needed tools passed up to the roof, Addison was there. When Addison struggled with heavy water buckets, Nathan appeared at her side. The afternoon passed in comfortable industry. Addison finished with her peas and moved on to the carrots, marking careful rows in the dark soil. Nathan completed the roof repairs just as the first raindrops began to fall. They hurried inside together, bringing armfuls of tools and seed packets. "Perfect timing," Addison said, brushing dirt from her skirts. "I'll put coffee on." While she worked at the stove, Nathan cleaned his tools and stored them properly. The cabin had grown more organized over the winter months, everything finding its proper place. Even Nathan's usual chaos had yielded to Addison's gentle influence. Rain drummed steadily on the new roof as they shared coffee and fresh bread. No leaks showed in the ceiling. Nathan's work had been thorough. The comfortable silence between them spoke of trust built through shared labor and quiet evenings. "Need to check the snare lines before dark," Nathan said finally, rising from his chair. "Rain might drive some rabbits out." "I'll come with you," Addison offered, reaching for her shawl. "The garden's done for today anyway." They walked together through the misty rain, checking Nathan's carefully set snares. The forest was quiet except for raindrops pattering on new leaves and the occasional call of a returning spring bird. 3 snares held rabbits. Good eating for the coming days. As Nathan reset the last snare, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "Been meaning to say something," he began, not meeting Addison's eyes. "About what I said that first day at the trading post. About your size." Addison's breath caught, but she waited silently. "I was wrong," Nathan continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Dead wrong. You're the strongest woman I've known. Stronger than most men, too. Not just in body, though you work harder than anyone. But here," he tapped his chest, "in spirit, in faith, in kindness that doesn't bend or break." Addison felt heat rise in her cheeks, her heart fluttering strangely. "Thank you, Nathan," she said softly. "That means a great deal, coming from you." Their eyes met in the gathering dusk, something unspoken passing between them. But before either could speak further, the sound of approaching horses broke the moment. Many horses, moving fast. Nathan's expression hardened. "Get back to the cabin," he said urgently. "Now." They hurried through the wet brush, but it was too late. Riders had already surrounded the cabin, led by Silas Grayson in his fine coat. The corrupt Sheriff Dugan sat his horse beside him, badge gleaming dully in the rain. "Mrs. Coulter," Grayson called out, his voice smooth as oil. "I'm afraid I have some unfortunate business to conduct." "What business?" Nathan demanded, stepping in front of Addison. Grayson produced a sheaf of papers from his coat. "Official charges of fraud, I'm afraid. It seems Mrs. Coulter has been occupying this land under false pretenses. Sheriff Dugan has a warrant for her arrest." "That's a lie." Nathan's hand moved toward his rifle, but 3 of Grayson's men already had weapons trained on him. "The law is the law," Sheriff Dugan drawled, dismounting heavily. "Mrs. Coulter, you'll need to come with me." "I have legal papers," Addison protested. "The preacher can vouch." "All in good time," Grayson interrupted. "For now, you'll be held until the matter is sorted out." He nodded to his men. "Take her in." Nathan lunged forward as 2 men grabbed Addison's arms, but more men surrounded him. The fight was brutal but brief, 4 against 1. Nathan fought like a wildcat, but a rifle butt to the head finally dropped him to the mud. Blood ran from his temple as he struggled to rise again. "Nathan!" Addison cried out, trying to reach him, but strong hands held her back. "Leave him," Grayson ordered coldly. "He'll live, probably. Mrs. Coulter, I suggest you come quietly, unless you want us to finish what we started with your protector." Addison's eyes filled with tears as she watched Nathan try to push himself up, only to collapse again. "Let me help him first," she pleaded. "Time to go," Sheriff Dugan growled, pulling her toward his horse. "Wait." Addison twisted free for a moment, running back to the cabin. Before they could stop her, she grabbed her worn Bible from beside her bed. "Please," she said, clutching it to her chest. "Let me take this at least." Grayson gave an exaggerated sigh. "If you must. Now come along." The ride to town was a blur of cold rain and colder fear. Addison's heart ached for Nathan, left bleeding in the mud, but she forced herself to be strong. She held her Bible tight, drawing comfort from its familiar weight. The jail was a small building of rough stone, dark and damp. Sheriff Dugan threw her none too gently into a cell, the iron door clanging shut with terrible finality. "Sweet dreams, Mrs. Coulter," Grayson called mockingly as they left. "Perhaps tomorrow you'll be more amenable to selling your claim." Alone in the darkness, Addison sank to her knees on the dirty floor. She could hear rats scurrying in the corners, but she forced down her fear. Opening her Bible with trembling hands, she began to pray aloud. "Lord, protect Nathan," she whispered. "Give him strength to heal, and give me courage to face whatever comes." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "They can lock my body in this cell, but they cannot imprison my spirit or my faith." Outside, the spring rain fell steadily, washing away the last patches of winter snow. In the mud before her cabin, Nathan lay unconscious, blood mixing with rain, and in her cold cell, Addison prayed through the long dark hours, her Bible clutched close to her heart, waiting for dawn to reveal what fate would bring. Pain throbbed through Nathan's skull as consciousness slowly returned. The familiar scent of wood smoke and dried herbs reached him first, then the soft crackle of a nearby fire. He blinked, his vision blurry, trying to make sense of unfamiliar walls and shadows dancing in lamplight. "Easy now," a gentle voice cautioned. "You took quite a beating." Nathan's eyes focused on Preacher Thomas's weathered face hovering above him. The old man pressed a cool cloth to Nathan's forehead, and memory rushed back like a flood. Grayson's men, the fight, Addison being dragged away. Addison! Nathan tried to sit up but fell back with a groan as the room spun violently. "She's in the jail," the preacher said quietly. "My wife found you unconscious in the mud. We brought you here to the parsonage." Nathan touched his temple gingerly, feeling bandages wrapped around his head. His ribs screamed in protest with each breath. "How long?" "Nearly 2 days now. The fever broke last night." The preacher's expression grew grave. "But we're running out of time, Nathan." Grayson's men filed fraudulent papers claiming Addison obtained her deed illegally. "Unless we can prove otherwise at tomorrow's hearing, she'll lose everything. The land, her freedom, perhaps even her life if they press charges of willful fraud." Shame burned in Nathan's chest, hot and bitter. He had promised to protect her, yet he'd failed. Left bleeding in the dirt while they took her away. Some protector he'd turned out to be. "Help me up," he growled, forcing himself to sit despite the stabbing pain. "You're in no condition," the preacher began. "I said, help me up." Nathan's voice cracked, with emotion. "I won't lay here while she suffers alone." The preacher studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. But first, drink this willow bark tea for the pain. You'll need your wits about you." Nathan choked down the bitter brew while the preacher helped him dress. Every movement was agony, but he gritted his teeth against it. His own discomfort meant nothing compared to what Addison must be enduring. The night air was cool and damp as they stepped outside. Nathan leaned heavily on the preacher's arm, hating his weakness but too dizzy to manage alone. They had only gone a few steps when an ethereal sound stopped them both. A woman's voice, clear and strong, floated through the darkness. The words of an old hymn, one Nathan hadn't heard since childhood. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." "Addison," Nathan whispered, his throat tight. They weren't the only ones who heard. All through town, windows were lighting up. People emerged from their homes, drawn by the pure, unwavering voice that carried hope and defiance in equal measure. Nathan watched as they gathered in the street, moving slowly toward the jail. "I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see." The growing crowd moved in reverent silence. Even the usual town drunks stood quietly, hats in hand. Nathan saw tears on more than one weather-worn face as Addison's voice rose to the stars. "Through many dangers, toils and snares, I have already come." His own vision blurred as they reached the edge of the crowd. The jail's small window glowed with lamplight, and through the bars Nathan could just make out Addison's silhouette. She stood straight and tall, her Bible held close as she sang, "'Tis grace has brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home." The weight of his failure, his pride, his years of bitterness crashed over Nathan like a wave. His legs gave out, and he sank to his knees in the dirt, no longer caring who saw. Tears he'd held back for decades streamed down his face. "Lord," he whispered, the words strange and rusty in his mouth after so many years. "Lord, I ain't worthy to ask nothing of you. Been running from you most my life." His shoulders shook as he continued. "But she is worthy. Addison's got more faith in her little finger than I ever had. Please, please don't let my weakness be her undoing. Show me how to help her. Show me the way back to you." The preacher's hand rested gently on his shoulder as Addison's voice soared into the night. "When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun." As the last note faded, silence held the crowd in its grip. Then somewhere, someone began to hum the melody. Others joined in, the sound swelling until dozens of voices carried the hymn back to Addison. Nathan saw handkerchiefs dabbing at eyes, heads bowed in prayer, neighbors who hadn't spoken in years standing shoulder to shoulder. "Well, I'll be," the preacher murmured. "In all my years, I've never seen anything quite like this." Nathan struggled to his feet, supported by the preacher's steady arm. His body still ached fiercely, but something else had changed, as if a great weight had lifted from his soul. He looked up at the barred window where Addison stood, her face peaceful despite her circumstances, and felt the stirring of something he hadn't known in years: hope. Through the crowd, he caught glimpses of transformation. The banker's wife, who had once mocked Addison's size, now wept openly. The saloon keeper, who had laughed at Nathan's cruel jokes that first night, stood with head bowed in shame. Even the sheriff's deputy shifted uncomfortably. doubt clear on his young face as he watched the scene unfold. Another hymn began. This one started by the washerwoman who lived near the creek. More voices joined in, creating a symphony of faith that rose above the sleeping town. Nathan saw lanterns being lit in windows all down the street, more people emerging to join the impromptu gathering. The preacher squeezed Nathan's shoulder. You see, sometimes the Lord works in ways we least expect. Addison's faith isn't just inspiring you, it's awakening something in the whole town. Nathan nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He watched as Mrs. Peterson, the baker's wife, stepped forward with a quilt she'd brought from home. She passed it through the window bars to Addison, whose soft "thank you" carried clearly in the night air. Others followed her example. The cobbler's daughter brought fresh bread. The blacksmith's wife offered a jar of preserves. One by one, the townspeople who had stood by in silence while injustice was done began to take small stands against it. Nathan felt strength returning to his legs, purpose replacing his shame. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but tonight had shown him something vital. They weren't alone in this fight anymore. Addison's quiet courage and unshakable faith had awakened something powerful in the community, something that couldn't be bullied or bought by men like Grayson. As the hymns continued into the night, Nathan closed his eyes and added his own rough voice to the chorus. The words came back to him from deep memory, his mother's Bible readings by lamplight long ago. Standing there in the cool spring air, surrounded by the voices of a town being transformed, Nathan Boone felt the first stirrings of rebirth in his own hardened heart. Addison's voice rose once more above the others, strong and clear, and Nathan knew with sudden certainty that whatever tomorrow might bring, neither of them would face it alone. Dawn broke over the town, painting the jail's weathered walls in soft gold. Nathan stood outside, his injuries still aching but his spirit strengthened by last night's awakening. He adjusted his collar, smoothed down his freshly washed shirt, and stepped into the sheriff's office. "Come to see the widow," he announced, voice steady despite his racing heart. The deputy, young Tom Wilson, glanced up from his coffee. After witnessing the previous night's gathering, something had shifted in his demeanor. "5 minutes," he said quietly, leading Nathan to the cells. Addison sat on her narrow cot, Bible open in her lap. Morning light through the barred window caught the silver threads in her shawl. Despite her circumstances, her face remained serene. "Nathan," she smiled, rising to meet him at the bars. "You're looking better. Don't you fret about me." He reached through the bars to grasp her hand, marveling at its warmth and strength. "I'm getting you out of here, Addison. Got plans in motion." She squeezed his fingers. "I believe in you, Nathan. God brought you into my life for a purpose." Her words, so simple and sure, settled deep in his chest. "I won't let you down again. You never have," she whispered. "Look." She gestured to the other cells, where 3 rough-looking men sat quietly. "We had quite a prayer meeting this morning. Even Mr. Jenkins there." She nodded to a grizzled fellow in the corner, joined in singing hymns. The old horse thief ducked his head, embarrassed but smiling. "Time's up," Deputy Wilson called, not unkindly. Nathan held Addison's gaze. "Keep praying. Help's coming." Outside, Nathan's first stop was the livery stable. He saddled his horse, ignoring the protest of his bruised ribs, and rode hard toward the creek where he knew the Comanche family had their winter camp. White deer's smoke signals rose above the trees long before he reached their site. The old hunter stood waiting, as if he'd known Nathan would come. "Brother," White Deer greeted him in English. "We heard the singing in town. My wife says the widow woman has strong medicine. Stronger than she knows," Nathan agreed, dismounting carefully. "I need your help, old friend. The railroad man uses false papers to steal her land." White Deer's wife, Gray Dove, emerged from their lodge. "We have seen such men before," she said, her accent thick but words clear. "They come with papers, leave with blood." "Not this time," Nathan insisted. "Will you stand with us?" The couple exchanged looks. Their son, young Hawk, stepped forward. "The widow woman shared her bread with us, treated us like family when others turned away. We will come." Relief flooded Nathan's chest. "Thank you. Meet me at the preacher's house at sundown. Bring anyone else who's witnessed Grayson's dealings." Back in town, Nathan's next stop was the printer's shop. Old Mr. Henderson was examining a telegram with a magnifying glass when Nathan entered. "Interesting timing," Henderson said, holding up the yellow paper. "Just got word from the territorial office. Seems Mr. Grayson's been busy filing similar claims in 3 other counties. Can you prove it? Henderson's eyes twinkled. Already sent for copies. Should arrive on tomorrow's stage. Nathan clasped the printer's shoulder. Come to the preacher's tonight. Bring everything you've got. Throughout the day, Nathan moved through town, gathering allies. The banker's wife, still moved by Addison's hymns, promised to share what she knew about suspicious deposits in Grayson's account. The telegraph operator admitted to intercepting coded messages about forged deeds. Even the saloon keeper, conscience-stricken, offered to testify about overheard conversations. As sunset approached, Nathan knelt in his room at the boarding house. His mother's Bible lay open beside his revolver on the bed. He touched the worn leather cover, remembering her gentle hands turning these same pages. Lord, he prayed, voice rough with emotion, guide my steps. Show me how to fight this battle with both wisdom and courage. He tucked the Bible into his left pocket, the revolver into his right. The weight of both gave him comfort as he headed to the preacher's house. The parsonage's front room was already crowded when he arrived. White Deer and his family sat dignified near the fireplace. The banker's wife perched nervously on a wooden chair while Henderson spread telegrams across the table. The saloon keeper leaned against the wall, hat in hand. More townspeople filtered in quietly through the back door. Friends, the preacher began, we're here because a good woman sits in jail while injustice walks free. Each of you has seen or heard something of Mr. Grayson's schemes. Now's the time to bring it to light. One by one, they shared their pieces of the puzzle. The telegraph operator produced copies of coded messages. Henderson laid out a pattern of suspicious land claims. The banker's wife detailed irregular transactions. Young Hawk described witnessing Grayson's men threatening other homesteaders. But will it be enough? Someone asked. The sheriff's in Grayson's pocket. Then we go above him, Nathan declared. Straight to the territorial judge. He's due in 3 days for circuit court. Grayson will know we're gathering evidence, the preacher warned. He's dangerous when cornered. More dangerous than leaving an innocent woman in jail, Nathan challenged. More dangerous than letting him steal land from honest folks? A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Grey Dove stood, her presence commanding attention. The widow shows courage. We must do the same. She placed a beaded bracelet on the table. This is our pledge to stand with her. Others followed suit. The banker's wife removed her cameo brooch. Henderson added his gold pocket watch. The saloon keeper laid down a silver dollar. One by one, they added tokens of their commitment. Nathan touched the Bible in his pocket, then drew out his mother's silver cross on its leather cord. He placed it atop the pile. Tomorrow at first light, he said. We start gathering sworn statements. Every detail, every scrap of evidence. We'll build a wall of truth so high even Grayson can't climb over it. The preacher raised, his hands in blessing. Let us pray for wisdom and protection, for Addison's strength, and for justice to prevail. As the others bowed their heads, Nathan remained standing, watching through the window as lamps were lit across town. Somewhere in the growing darkness, Addison's voice rose in evening hymns from her cell, carrying hope to fellow prisoners and townsfolk alike. He touched the Bible and revolver, feeling the weight of both responsibilities. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but tonight he knew with certainty that God's hand was moving in this place, using unlikely instruments, a widow's faith, a mountain man's redemption, and a community's awakening conscience, to shine light into dark corners. The preacher's prayer continued, but Nathan's own prayer was simpler. Lord, make me worthy of her trust. Sunlight streamed through the courthouse windows as people packed the wooden benches. Nathan stood tall beside the preacher, watching Grayson swagger to the front with his forged deed. Your Honor, Grayson proclaimed, my claim is ironclad. We beg to differ. Nathan stepped forward, his voice steady. He laid out telegrams, bank records, and sworn statements on the judge's desk. These prove, Mr. Grayson has filed false claims across 3 counties. The preacher testified next, describing Addison's legitimate inheritance. White Deer and his family spoke of Grayson's men threatening homesteaders. The banker's wife detailed suspicious transactions. Sheriff Dugan shifted uncomfortably as evidence mounted. Townsfolk began calling out, demanding he explain his part in the scheme. Under the judge's stern gaze, the sheriff's courage crumbled. Grayson, face reddening, backed toward the door. This is absurd. I won't stand for. Arrest that man, the judge ordered, but Grayson was already fleeing. The court finds in favor of Mrs. Addison Coulter, the judge declared. Her claim stands. Cheers erupted as Addison emerged from her cell. She walked, straight to Nathan, eyes shining. Lifting her face to heaven, tears streaming, she whispered, "Thank you, Lord. Thank you." The one-room church glowed with dozens of candles that evening, their light dancing across wooden pews packed with townsfolk. Paper garlands hung from the rafters, celebrating Addison's victory over injustice. Children darted between benches while women set out plates of cornbread and apple pie. Nathan stood near the back, tugging at his cleaned but threadbare collar. His eyes never left Addison as she moved through the crowd, accepting hugs and well wishes. Her face shone with joy, making her more beautiful than ever to him. Something shifted in his heart. Before he could stop himself, Nathan strode forward and took her hand. The room hushed. Even the children stilled. "Got something to say," he announced, his voice gruff but clear. "First night I met Addison, I said something cruel. Said I'd never marry a fat girl." He squeezed her hand tighter. "Turns out, I was wrong. I'd be lost without this woman." Gasps rippled through the congregation, followed by surprised applause. Addison's eyes filled with tears as she gripped his calloused fingers. The preacher's knowing smile spread wide across his weathered face. Outside, stars blazed in the velvet sky as Nathan and Addison walked hand in hand into the night, followed by the happy cheers of children. Morning sunlight streamed through the church's stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across wooden pews packed with townsfolk. The bell in the small tower rang out clear and sweet, calling everyone to witness the union of Nathan Boone and Addison Coulter. Inside, lanterns glowed despite the morning light, warming the simple space with their golden flicker. Flowers gathered from nearby meadows decorated every surface, their wild beauty perfectly suited to the occasion. The preacher stood at the altar, Bible in hand, while Nathan shifted from boot to boot, his usually stern face softened with emotion. When Addison appeared in the doorway, whispers of admiration rippled through the crowd. She wore a simple cream-colored gown, borrowed from the preacher's wife and carefully altered. Her dark hair was crowned with white prairie flowers, and her face glowed with quiet joy. As she walked down the narrow aisle, Nathan's eyes filled with tears he couldn't hide. "Never seen the mountain man cry before," someone whispered, but there was no mockery in the voice, only wonder at love's power to transform. The preacher's words rang out clear and strong. "What God has brought together, let no man put asunder." His weathered hands blessed their union as Nathan and Addison exchanged simple gold bands, their fingers trembling. The Comanche family, dressed in their finest, stepped forward after the ceremony. The matriarch presented a beautifully woven blanket, its patterns telling stories of unity and strength. "Two hearts become one," she said in careful English, wrapping it around both their shoulders. Outside in the churchyard, the whole community gathered to share a wedding feast. Steam rose from pots of rich stew, while baskets overflowed with fresh bread. Children played between the tables, and even the most hardened ranchers smiled at the celebration. As evening painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Nathan and Addison made their way home. The cabin waited for them, their own piece of heaven on earth. A lantern glowed in the window, welcoming them home. Inside, Nathan set his rifle in its usual spot by the door, but something was different now. The weapon that had been his constant companion through years of solitude seemed less necessary in the warmth of their shared home. Addison stood by the fireplace, flames casting a gentle light on her face. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, "for new beginnings and second chances." Nathan crossed to her, his steps sure and steady. Their first kiss as husband and wife was sweet and tender, the lamplight dancing across their joined hands. The woven blanket still draped their shoulders, binding them together in love and faith, while outside their cabin, stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.